I'd like to share today a couple of what I believe to be Clovis, Paleo story stone face and mammoth effigies from Mount Shasta, California. Now, these were dug by Lady Nellie Thompson on her property at Mount Shasta in the late 60s, early 70s, and have since been sold worldwide. She and her neighbor had dug thousands of these. And these are just outstanding Paleo Preform type effigies. Now, I've done a number of videos on Clovis Preform cash blade effigies from Mount Shasta. Two of them in periwinkle blue are truly outstanding. They're beautifully flaked and engraved. But I wanted to share this one along with another one because they're so similar, and they're both from Mount Shasta, made out of beautiful nature-made volcanic glass. And in the more section below the video, you can read about this volcanic glass and the scientific testing that I've done with the Stephen F. Austin State University in Texas, their geology department, and geologist Rick Shaw, having run X-ray fluorescence testing on 3 examples that were all effigies. And the spreadsheet is also included in the more section below, which confirms that this is actually nature-made volcanic glass and not man-made slag glass as many people had thought previously. It's just that nobody had ever done their homework and nobody had ever done scientific testing on this glass until I did in 2022. Now, these are beautifully flaked and etched, and according to some of the comments that I've had on my YouTube channel, I know there are a lot of laymen that really don't know about flaking, paleo flaking, and paleo etching and engraving, which is what I discovered on flake stone as well after I discovered these effigies. In fact, Dr. Michael Gramley has published a book that I'd highly recommend. It's called Paleolithic Artifacts and Features of the Americas. It's a new publication. It's kind of the Bible of Paleolithic artifacts in the Americas. And if we turn to this page here, we see an article entitled Story Stone. And this is a book on paleo artifacts. I call these paleo story stones. And he listed them as story stone. The term was coined by the scientist Richard Dempsey on the basis of my discovery in the Mojave Desert. And it describes them here. It talks about story stones are made by flaking and engraving a wide variety of raw materials, employing techniques that are characteristic of Paleolithic stoneworking. So you see the word flaking and engraving. The first paleo story stone effigy that I discovered is featured on a video on my YouTube channel it's entitled The First Paleo Story Stone Ever Discovered. Nobody had ever observed these effigies until my discovery in October of 2020. And the first one is flaked and it's engraved. And I welcome you to look at the video of the first paleo story stone ever discovered. It's made out of chert and was found on top of Harvard Hill, which, according to Dr. Michael Gramley, is a presumed Clovis site. And so I want to describe some of the flaking. I'm not going to get into baton flaking or indirect percussion. I'm going to keep it simple and just describe 2 forms of flaking we call percussion flaking and pressure flaking. Now, this piece came from this is a paleo biface cash blade. And again, there's a couple of them that are featured on my YouTube channel. The periwinkle blue ones are outstanding. They're Clovis cash blade offerings that were in the form of paleo story stones. The Paleo Indians, including Clovis, revered this stone so much that they did not make utilitarian wear out of it at all. So there are no spear points made out of it, scrapers, or anything, or knives made out of it. But there are preforms made out of it that were made into effigies. And this is one of them. This is basically a Handaxe, just like the Handaxe that I featured on a previous video from the many Handaxes I featured on a previous video from the Mojave Desert. I've found thousands of these Handaxes, so I'm quite familiar with them. And it's made with percussion flaking and pressure flaking. So this came from a larger stone. And this is a percussion flake, this smooth, flat area. Percussion flaking is a rock hitting against a rock to peel off part of the stone. So this came from a larger stone. They used percussion flaking to make the general outline that they want. And then they finish the edge work with pressure flaking, in this case with the effigies, to form the face profiles and the mammoth profile. So they contour the edges mainly with pressure flaking. But percussion flaking is rock against rock, and it strikes a large flat surface. You see that large flat surface would be all the way across. Now we see this engraving right in the middle of this percussion flake. This has all been dished out. That's below the level of the flake. So after they flaked the stone, then they etched it. So the etching has nothing to do with the stone itself. It's not natural to the stone, and it's certainly not any type of conchoidal fracture whatsoever. It's been engraved actually into the stone, and you can see it's below it. Here's the flake. Then they scooped it out by etching the surface, and they beautifully etched that. Look at that. It's very well patterned etching. It's not random lines. And then you see the etching lines here that are actually grooved into the stone. Now we see that etching not just on this volcanic glass. We see it on Paleo obsidian, Paleo rose quartz. We see it on citrine crystal. We see it on agate. We see it on chert, the first Paleo story stone ever discovered. We see it on meteorites. We see it on all kinds of stone. And the etching is to image the hair of the mammoth and the faces that comprise a Paleo story stone effigy, as well as oftentimes the eyes of the mammoth in particular, and oftentimes the human faces as well. So we have a large percussion flake, and then pressure flaking are these little small tiny flakes that were used to trim out the edges of the artifact to make the general outline. And the pressure flaking would not be stone against stone. It would be like a deer antler, something hard like that, where they would put it onto the stone and apply pressure and then flake out small flakes where they could control it to make a spear point, for example. Clovis points were started with percussion flaking, and then they were finished with pressure flaking. And the pressure flaking would finish off the point in a beautifully symmetrical spear point. And so that's how these are made. And I wanted to clarify that because I think quite a few people that viewed the channel were not familiar with Paleo percussion flaking and pressure flaking, and were misguided in some of their assumptions. So what we have here is basically a Handaxe. It's really a preform, and it's a Clovis in nature. It looks like a Clovis preform, and it's found in Mount Shasta, where we know there are Clovis preforms and cache blades in the form of Paleo story stone face and mammoth effigies. And we have some beautiful imagery on this piece. This is the eye right here that's been flaked out of a human face, and this nose of the younger face with the open mouth, which is a routine image that we see repeating over and over again with Paleo story stone face and mammoth effigies, and then the rounded nose of the older face looking off to the right. Now when we turn it this way, now we have a mature mammoth, a great mature mammoth, with its eye right here, been flaked out right here. And it looks like it's aggressive, a charging stance, if you will. And that's the mature mammoth now facing right. And then when we turn it this way, now we have an outstanding baby mammoth with this little beak of a trunk that we see over and over and over again. We've seen thousands of I have thousands of examples of these and hundreds that are featured on my YouTube channel with the same beak-like trunk of the baby mammoth now facing left. But some of the engraving on this is just totally outstanding. For example, this eye here, it has been all scooped out of there. You can see it's all patterned etching. It's all subsurface below the original percussion flake, and was very well done. We believe that it was done with quartz crystals or some other type of crystal. I've experimented with this glass, and yes, quartz crystal does etch this glass. This glass is probably a hardness of 6.5, maybe close to 7, and quartz crystals have a Mohs scale hardness of about 7. So quartz crystals will etch this glass for sure. And then when we turn it this way, wow, we have an outstanding eye there, exaggerated eye. The baby mammoth often is imaged with an exaggerated eye. I believe that the eye of the mammoth, when it was born, kept the same size eye all through its lifetime. And so the eye of the baby mammoth was probably very large or appeared large, and then became smaller as the mammoth became more mature. So now we have the baby mammoth with this little beak of a trunk facing off to the right. And what a beautifully engraved eye. And we see oftentimes hair flaring from the eye. And of course, that's those engraving lines right there that are patterned. They're not random, they're patterned, and they're hair flaring away from this patterned etching of the exaggerated eye of the baby mammoth now facing right. Just outstanding. And then, of course, we have that mature mammoth again facing left. And we have the faces again with this, the eye, and the nose, pointed nose and open mouth of the younger face looking off to the right, and the older face looking off to the left. But this is in the form of a Clovis biface preform, and I'm sure that's what this is, but it just happens to be made out of volcanic glass instead of rose quartz, or instead of agate or petrified wood or chert. And then when we look at this piece, by the way, this piece was purchased from a Canadian seller of what they call Andara volcanic glass, and it was labeled a Mount Shasta piece. This was also labeled a Mount Shasta piece, and this came from a seller actually in Mount Shasta. And what we have here is the eye of the baby mammoth. It's identical. You see, this is a flake. It's a percussion flake that's been flaked off of a larger stone, larger piece of this volcanic glass. And then it was a very smooth surface, as I've described before. And then what they do is they dish it out by using etching tools to make that exaggerated eye of the baby mammoth with this little trunk facing off to the left and massive hair tuft. And that's typically how a baby mammoth is imaged. But when we turn it over here, the cool thing is now we have the mature mammoth with its eye separately engraved on top of its head with the large sweeping trunk coming off to the right. And that engraving is just outstanding. Again, that's actually grooved into the stone. So this was a smooth surface, and then you see the etching lines are contoured. They're patterned. It has nothing to do with any type of conchoidal fracture whatsoever. Conchoidal fracture is what you might see when a BB hits your windshield. It shoots off lines that are irregular and not patterned. This, you can see, is very, very well done, sculpted right into the glass, just as we saw the eye of the baby mammoth here, which is right here, and we'll look at that again right there. That's obviously not a conchoidal fracture, but some people are not aware of paleo flaking and paleo etching. So I wanted to just try to educate the layman a little bit better on these paleo stoneworking techniques that make up these paleo storystone face and mammoth effigies. And then we have that mature mammoth, its eye here, its big sweepy trunk off to the right. Beautiful glass, beautiful natural volcanic glass. In the more section below, you can read about the scientific testing that I've done on this. In fact, I believe I was the first to do the scientific testing. Nobody else had ever done their homework on this. So many people thought this was man-made slag glass for many years. But it's actually volcanic glass, and there's an XRF spreadsheet from the Stephen F. Austin State University. There's a link to it on the more section below this video, which will give you the scientific information and the atomic makeup of this nature-made glass. Now we have the mature mammoth facing off to the left with the big sweepy trunk, and then of course we have the baby mammoth with that little beak of a trunk and massive hair tuft above the head. We have the eye of the human face right here, again scooped out and beautifully engraved into the stone there. And then the big sweepy nose of the older face looking off to the left. And then we have the eye here of the younger face with the nose and the open mouth, probably with a shaman pointed cap looking off to the right there. So each story stone effigy has two human faces, one young facing off to the right and one old facing off to the left, as well as one mature mammoth now facing off to the right, and that beautiful baby mammoth facing off to the left. Both of these are Mount Shasta volcanic glass effigies dug by Lady Nellie Thompson in the late 60s, early 70s on her property at Mount Shasta. They've been sold, there were thousands of them discovered, and they've been sold around the world ever since then. But just some beautiful Paleo story stone facing mammoth effigies. I'm sure Clovis in nature, Clovis biface, Preform, or Handaxe, held it like this, like a Handaxe. And many Handaxes from the Mojave Desert or Preforms are exactly this shape, and I've found thousands of them, and again featured them on a video just a little bit ago that you can view on my YouTube channel. Just an outstanding, beautifully worked, beautifully engraved Paleo story stone face and mammoth effigy made out of beautiful volcanic glass from Mount Shasta, California.